From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The political left launches another attack on Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, this time over the American flag. And a Harvard alumni group releases a new report about the startling nature of anti-Semitism on that university campus. Welcome to Potomac Watch. I'm Kim Strassel, joined today by my colleagues, Mene Weberua and Bill McGurn. Let's start with this new uproar over Justice Alito, which came about when a Thursday New York Times story reported that in January of 2021, not long before Joe Biden was inaugurated, the Alito's yard at their home in Alexandria, Virginia, briefly flew an upside-down American flag. This information was based on interviews and photos from the Alito's neighbors. Now, it turns out there's quite an involved backstory to all of this. It didn't start to get filled in until later, but initially the New York Times placed this solely in the context of the fact that at the time, an upside-down flag was a gesture by some Americans to show solidarity with Donald Trump's Stop the Steal campaign. And thus the intimation was that somehow Justice Alito was in essence an election denier. Mene, there's actually a fair amount more to this. Why don't you tell us the facts of what we actually know about how this flag flying came to be?
Absolutely. So to go back to January of 2021, of course, our listeners will recall that these Supreme Court members who are conservatives have faced a lot of scrutiny, a lot of threats, a lot of pressure in their own neighborhoods. The critiques of them generally are not limited to the political realm and the press, but you've had incidents like Brett Kavanaugh facing a person who came to his home trying to threaten him, etc. You've had protests outside of the homes of these justices, and all of this reached a boiling point around the time after the election because progressives are having a lot of ill will towards these conservative justices and believed that they were part of this conspiracy to protect President Donald Trump in the wake of the 2020 election. So it was already a very politically fraught time. And as the reporting suggests, Samuel Alito's wife had gotten into a dispute with a neighbor who was essentially harassing her. They exchanged some really, really difficult and offensive words. And the claim that Samuel Alito makes is that she decided to fly the upside-down flag in their yard in part as a response to this. I think she was very agitated by these confrontations and facing this harassment in their own neighborhood. He says that he was not aware of it, that he had nothing to do with the planning to fly it in this way, and that was only for a very short amount of time. But the point is that this wasn't a gesture that came out of nowhere, but it very much was something that was a result of the harassment that the Alito family was facing. His wife made this decision to fly the flag in an inverted way, and that was the context in which it all took place. And so it's now only years later that this reporting is coming out and these images have circulated of it going on, but it does fit into this longer story of these conservative majority justices on the Supreme Court facing harassment in their own neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think that's the really important point, is that the context, as you said, was very narrowly cast by the media as this election question. But it's the much broader context, which is, I think, is two things: the partisan divide over Donald Trump and his picks for the Supreme Court. Also, the context of the very partisan anger directed at individual court members, for instance, Justice Alito, and in particular for his role in writing the Dobbs decision and overturning Roe v. Wade. And it sounds from some of the stories that in itself had caused some animus among the Alito's neighbors. There had been some unfriendly instances even before all of this happened. By the way, the particular week that this went on in January, some of the details of what the neighbors had done to Alito's were pretty shocking. Some foul language put on signs right next to a children's bus stop, some bad words directed at the justice's wife herself. And Bill, I think that this is important because right now the media's attempt to just suggest that this has something to do with January 6th is almost willfully denying this broader attack on the court and the hatred that's been directed at the justices. And don't you think it's notable that they don't want to talk about that right now at all?
Yeah, they don't want to talk about it, exactly what happened. Kim, the words that were used against Mrs. Alito, I couldn't say to you.
Right.
Disgusting. I wouldn't say to you. We wouldn't be allowed to say it on air. But it's okay against Supreme Court justice. It's in the tradition of Chuck Schumer, who warned Gorsuch and Kavanaugh by names that they're going to reap the whirlwind if they overturn Roe versus Wade. The behavior is despicable. Like January 6th, yes, horrible. And we had some real lunkheads going in. But Chuck Schumer is the United States Senator, the Senate Majority Leader. We expect better. And look, Alito's open season because he wrote the opinion in Dobbs overturning Roe v. Wade. That's all this is about. There have apparently been protests at his house regularly since then.
Yes.
And they want to discredit him. And I saw someone tweet, what they want is for every story to have mention of Sam Alito followed by a phrase saying he's been involved in a number of controversies that question his ethics and so forth. My sympathy is all with Mrs. Alito. These people have behaved badly, and it's all politically driven, and they don't care. Even John Roberts criticized Senator Schumer, very rare, saying it was really dangerous to do the kind of thing they do. And I think so much of the left just winks at this terrible behavior. And again, the last point is, we know Donald Trump busts norms and he says things he shouldn't have. But I think you look at this and you say, he's not the only one.
Oh, not at all. And in that regard, I think we have to put this in one more context too, Monet, which is the context of the purpose behind these attacks, which Bill just alluded to, saying that these are being lumped together with other claims that Justice Alito has an ethics problem. This is an ongoing campaign, and the goal of that campaign is to tar the reputation of conservative justices in aid of pressuring them into recusing themselves from these high-profile cases. And as water runs downhill, immediately following the flag story news, Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, one of the court's loudest critics in Congress, called for Justice Alito to recuse himself in the current Supreme Court case looking at the question of presidential immunity in Special Counsel Jack Smith's January 6th case. And both he and Clarence Thomas have been the focus of some of these attacks. The goal is to try to pressure them to suggest they have to step down in the hopes that they can change the outcome of those cases. This is a very serious goal. This is the same Dick Durbin who, along with Sheldon Whitehouse, has already written legislation that would essentially allow Congress to decide when justices must recuse themselves because they don't like the makeup of the court and they want to change the outcome of some of the cases by other means. So the left is, meanwhile, all in supporting this. I noticed the media hauling out all manner of would-be ethicists, insisting that what happened in the Alito yard is a clear violation of ethics. But Monet, is it really?
Well, I think that there's absolutely no reason to believe that what happened in the Alito's yard has anything to do with the code of ethics that the Supreme Court is beholden to, or that it should require Samuel Alito to recuse from the Trump cases or any other case. I think historically, recusal has been something that judges and justices do when they have an interest in the outcome of the case. For example, if it concerns a company in which they hold stock, or if they have expressed an opinion publicly about what the outcome of that specific case should be. But of course, the strategy of Democrats, as conservatives have consolidated their majority on the Supreme Court, is to try to broaden that circle as much as possible and to push for recusal with anything and everything that they can possibly throw at the justices. And it really has gone from, an overreach into almost self-parody at this point, to the moment that anything that they can use to insinuate bias in the justices becomes public, they will start to push for recusal. And this isn't just the liberal-leaning press, but this is actual Democratic members of the Senate who have a responsibility to defend the institution of the court. But as you've said, they've abdicated that responsibility. You saw it pushing to force Alito to recuse because he had a conversation with a conservative lawyer who had issue coming before the court, despite the fact that they didn't talk about that specific case. You saw it pushing to have Clarence Thomas recused because he happened to go on trips with a conservative donor who doesn't have any business before the court. But basically, they feel that this is their only strategy because they only have 3 justices on the court. They know that with some of these issues, they're not going to be able to slam through a progressive interpretation of the law the way that they did when they had the majority. And I think that they know Samuel Alito is not going to recuse because of this. And so the purpose of asking him to recuse is not necessarily the idea that it's going to actually change the outcome of the case and he's going to vote. The purpose is to be able to discredit whatever the eventual ruling is. When there is a ruling handed down on the Trump immunity case or on the broader January 6th case, they are going to say that a decision is completely discredited by the fact that Samuel Alito was compromised. And so they're going to float these requests for recusal beforehand in advance of any controversial case. And then when it comes down, they're going to say that this is completely illegitimate and just another example of conservatives running roughshod on norms when that really characterizes their own behavior.
Yeah, excellent point. I would note that they would call it illegitimate, probably whether this flag event had happened or not, but you are right. They will double down on that. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, more on this flag uproar, what's behind it, and what comes next when we're back. Welcome back to Potomac Watch. I am Kim Strassel. I am here with Bill McGurn and Mene Guebrua. We are talking about this uproar over the flag that was flown back in 2021 in the Alito's yard. And Mene was just making the good case about ethics. I agree with this. There is no cause for Alito to recuse himself from this immunity case. Also, just because Martha Ann Alito, his wife, an American in her own right, she is entitled to her own opinions. He has said he had nothing to do with this, and we have not found in the past, nor has the justices ever deemed the actions of their spouse grounds to recuse. If that were the case, lots of justices have engaged people in Washington, D.C. practices, and this is something that we put aside because we assume that the justices do not take that into consideration when they are making their decisions. Now, Bill, you could maybe argue it was a tactical error for Mrs. Alito to do this, only that it gave her critics an opening. At the same time, on this point about ethics, there always seems to be a double standard here in terms of how the media and the left treats conservative justices compared to liberal justices. We have certainly had prior Supreme Court justices who, as I note, have had spouses that are engaged in political issues, have not been called on to recuse. But we've also had Supreme Court justices that have outright engaged themselves in politics in a quite partisan manner. There's this episode of Ruth Bader Ginsburg back in 2016 telling the New York Times, I can't imagine what this place would be. I can't imagine what the country would be with Donald Trump as our president. For the country, it could be 4 years. For the court, it could be, I don't even want to contemplate that. And then she threw in that she might need to move to New Zealand. Now, Bill, she did apologize for that remark, but is my memory failing, or did I just miss all those calls back then for her to recuse herself? I don't remember them. Or more recently, the Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Janet Protasiewicz. It doesn't seem as though the standard is the same here.
Yeah, it's not the same, and everyone sees it. Look, this is just a classic smear designed to discredit Sam Alito and, by implication, discredit any decision that he may be a part of. And it's payback for Dobbs. Remember also, Dobbs, the decision was leaked. We don't know who it is, or at least I don't know who it was, but it certainly seems to be someone trying to undermine Samuel Alito. And it went on from the beginning. Do you remember at the hearings for Alito, his wife left in tears after questioning, Senator Kennedy asked the question that if Alito shared the belief that blacks and Latinos, quote, just don't seem to know their place. An outrageous question. And it's never pointed to among the other justices. So we all know what this is about. Unfortunately, the Alitos are caught in a crossfire. But we all know what it's about. A good woman was pushed too hard and may have lost her cool and strung this flag. I'd like a little more attention to what led up to it.
Yeah, I agree. Mene, let me ask you this. What do you think the odds are that Justice Alito actually bows to such a thing? Because it strikes me that if you're the left and you're actually on a mission to force justices to recuse. This has been one justice who has actually become a little bit more outspoken in recent months, last year, about the attacks on the court and how inappropriate they are. He certainly does feel as though he is being targeted, and I wonder if that hasn't in some ways just further resolved him not to capitulate to this kind of intimidation. That certainly seems to be the attitude as well of Clarence Thomas, who has been, as Bill notes and you note, the other subject of very harsh criticism and attacks. And he, has come out and offered some explanations for specific criticisms have been leveled, but beyond that has seemed pretty steadfast that he isn't going to in any way suggest that there really is any ethical issue here. I was really pleased to see the court come out with its own statement of its ethics principles, as it were, I think at the end of last year, and that all of the justices signed on to that. There does seem to be an awareness by the court of what's going on here, but I don't know. Where do you think all of this goes?
Absolutely. I mean, to answer your first question, I think the odds that Justice Alito recuses himself are exactly zero, as they should be, because there is absolutely no reason for him to remove himself based on what we know about this episode. And it would be tremendously harmful to the reputation and the integrity of the court for him to capitulate to a demand of this kind coming from the left. And so he understands that very well. He has said as much publicly, and I think that's what listeners should expect. But I think that what you mentioned about the statement of ethical principles from the court is very important, because it shows that even the liberal justices up until this point understand that the Democratic Party is pushing the court in a way that is not good for the actual integrity of the court. And they haven't so far joined in some of these very, very unfair critiques of the conservative justices. They haven't publicly called for recusals. That's not to say that there aren't certain disagreements. Elena Kagan, after some of Samuel Alito's remarks about the court's ability to self-regulate, did openly disagree and suggest that there might be room for Congress to create a code of ethics for the court. And so we are still going to see disputes in good faith among liberals and conservatives about some of the legal issues that govern the court. But broadly, just the most spurious attacks that are being made by the left have not been taken up by the liberal justices. And I think that that's a very important sign that the court is still able to operate in a healthy and sound way, at least for now.
Yes, at least for now.